So, The Happiest Man on Earth by Eddie Jaku, his original name being Abraham Solomon Jakubowicz, I think, Jakubowicz, was born in 1920, I think, and he lived a long and very eventful life. He's perhaps best known for surviving the Holocaust, to put it simply. He saw so much pain, suffering, and hardship in his life, but at the end of it, he calls himself the happiest man on earth, the namesake of the book I'm reviewing, because he was so fortunate to have survived this, because there's so many, he saw so many of his friends, his best friend, he saw his his own parents didn't survive it. He saw his I think the only person who survived it was his sister, I believe, and to survive it, and you're scarred from it, and then so many people contemplate suicide afterwards because of just how awful it was. But he was able to also kind of use that hardship and difficulty to and the inhumanity that he felt was a victim of, and to turn that into something fighting against that, and subverting it and using it for good. He's actually spinning it and funneling it into helping others and being an activist for peace himself. So yeah, Eddie Jaku, he was nicknamed Eddie affectionately as a kid, and that's the way he calmly introduces himself in the book. It's pretty, the book is simply written. I'll put it that way. It's written so it can be accessible to everybody, pretty much, and you don't have to be, super in the know about obscure kind of out there books some of the stuff I've reviewed on this channel to read this book, because it's quite doable for anybody. Because I think one thing is that sure, there's some trigger warnings. Sure, he mentions being at the hand of the Gestapo's, being beaten up pretty badly, certain things that might be harsh to hear, but they're harsh truths that I think, it's kind of a cliche, but they are very important, truths that just need to be told in such a way that are, there's no sort of bomb to get around that. There's no salving way to kind of put the horrors that he saw. These are just the plain spoken truths. So but other than that, it is, he doesn't like to dwell on it. I think at some point, he says in the book, that he doesn't like to think and just kind of brood over those days and try to wallow in this, in it. So yeah, this is a semi-recent book. I think it came out a couple years ago, and he lived quite a long life. Eddie Jaku died recently, semi-recently, 2 years ago, I think, at the age of 101, I think, and his wife died shortly after. And so his initial thing was, he was I believe, a mechanical engineer, and he was born into Germany. I think it was right around Leipzig, I think he mentions, and he says that his father always wanted to teach him to be, to do something useful, because he knew that the rising nationalism was kind of in the air, this very kind of spooky allure of the Nazis, where they were slowly kind of gaining power, and he wanted to make sure that his son was kind of educated in a way, so he kind of lied about being, a full-blooded German to be able to get into this certain engineering school, which actually ended up being kind of his lifesaver in a number of ways, because he actually it ended up giving him something useful to do. So later on, they gave Jaku these different jobs and stuff. They're still really pitiful and kind of treating him super inhumanely, but at least he was, they gave him something. Not to put it kind of in a utilitarian kind of, well, at least it was useful, but that's what his, he gave it to his kind of the right of having some kind of duty left, that the Germans saw a value in him to kind of to keep the war machine and to keep everything else going, because as Germany as we all know, historically so, they kind of, exhausted themselves fighting a war on two fronts, and basically just using up all their resources and just like shooting themselves in the leg, foot, pretty much just like doing themselves like total disservice, like as far as strategy. I know nothing about military strategy at all. Might have been kind of a interest of mine when I was like a teen or like a kid maybe, but like I don't want to say I grew out of it, but I kind of like never, beyond the kind of Civil War, like American Civil War kind of, or American Revolutionary kind of things, but I never really studied too much on like World War II, like military kind of stuff or strategy. But yeah, there's Nazi Germany basically exhausted themselves. Yeah, they just tried biting off more than they can chew. They became way too ambitious, and that's how they kind of. And then that was very much so to the luck of the people like still who survived, like Jaku, who survived Buchenwald and Auschwitz too. Like he talks about using kind of like both finesse and the kind of his skill, and also kind of just like not only like the kind of quick wits of the actions of his father and mother that were able to kind of smuggle him past the border into Belgium, and then basically but even with their best bravery and their courage, trying to face the Gestapos and trying to get them. And he was talking right from the get-go that he was saying that he wasn't even fully Jewish. Like to them it wasn't this religious rite, like it wasn't something that he was painfully ceremonious about, like very going to the going to the synagogue on the Sabbath, or grieving, or Shiva and all that, like stuff. Like he didn't really acknowledge a lot of these kinds of Jewish holidays, and he wasn't ardently a part of this ideology of like but to Hitler but to the Nazis, the Gestapo, from the top down, all were mammothly anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic, and they thought the Jewish gypsy kind of wandering around, that they were the epitome of what was wrong, and they needed a scapegoat, so thus they had their sights set on the Jewish people of Germany or any other place, and they all evacuated, taken from whether it's Warsaw, Poland, or down in Austria, just like or people of their own nation, just whatever it was. Like it came down to the circumcision. Like were you, if you were, you're done for. So something that the movie Europa, I think it's called, with I don't know if I mentioned this. I do have a hard time watching it because it's a anti-war film, kind of like in the style of Come and See, but it's made by this Polish director, woman director. Can't remember her name, but she has Julie Delpy in it, I think, and that kind of reminded me of that. This thing that came down to the right of how you survive was just based off your own physiognomy, just really stupid, superficial things, biological facts. Like it really just idiotic. I think it's to think that way when you take this ideology to the nth degree. It results in so much pain and hardships on other people because people become way too mathematical and calculating, I think is what Eddie Jaku said. Like him, it came down to his birthright, just simple. It was it was a cultural thing. It wasn't even he was that emphatically religious, but he was thrown into this thing on Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass, I think it was also called, in 1938. That's when he was at the age of 17 or 18, just a kid, really. Fresh out of, I think he was at that trade school, like his father sent him to, who was able to kind of at least get some certification from there, I believe. So, lying about him being, not being Jewish. So, and now they're cracking down. So he says that the Gestapo came to his house and basically beat him half to death, and then killed his dog too. Like it was like so needless and extraneous stuff, like no purpose whatsoever to be that. But that was just kind of like the first taste of unfortunately for him. And he just talks about his road, all these hardships and all these. I keep using that word. I'm sorry. Being shipped off to different places where it literally came down to the bus that you took or the line that you were stuck in could mean life or death. Like Viktor Frankl too. I'd love to do Man's Search for Meaning by him. Like he said, the moment between the time when somebody sees something and judges it, or there's an amount of time between somebody's perception, between how long there's like that split second when you can choose how to react to that thing, and it can be either like a brute kind of reaction where it's bereft of ethics or morals or scruples or any kind of like niceties or empathy for others, or it can just be you can actually put some thought into it and choose how you react to things, like stoical truth too, I think. I think Epictetus said something, like it's everything that we see is, like there's so much pain that we put ourselves through that is mind. It's all in the mind, it's all. So I think that's a way of kind of a man can get used to anything, like Dostoevsky said too. This idea that you can just kind of persevere, and he also he credits it to Jaku. Also talked about his good friend that he knew since he was a kid. Like always looked out for him. I think he ended up surviving too, luckily, and like he credits him with being the person that was like every time like he was like at the very end of his rope, just completely like no rations left, completely browbeaten. He would still have like something like a tiny little bit of something to keep him going, or he'd be able to take his place working, or they looked out for each other, and that's kind of thing. Like it's like friendship. It's like the ultimate bond of kind of a like hardship, friendship, like a kind of love, and whether it's paternal, or just like a brotherly love too. It's all down to how you receive others, and it's like it's always the people that that's why the capos, there was Jewish capos that were guards that got better off. It's because they refused to they didn't refuse to use love. They didn't, they kind of like cowered. They were, they were frightened of losing their lives so much to the point that they had to like succor to something, or just like to see, some of the I think it was like Viktor Frankl too said that like some of the Jewish capos were capable of treating them much worse than some of the Nazi guards, which is interesting, because you'd think the Nazi guards would have more compulsion or need or reason to treat them worse, but it ended up being the Jewish, their own kind, So, yeah, there's a lot to be drawn from this. Eddie Jaku was, he had a really wonderful TED Talk too. Like he had, I think there's something I heard where there's a survey going around the world about who is the happiest man in the world, and it wasn't. Sounds kind of silly, but they're like looking at some of them were billionaires, so people that you would think would be happy, or just people who are really well off, or who had super, well paid, discreet attention to their bodies, and like I guess just fed themselves, worked out, and kind of maintain every certain thing that in life that makes them happy, or it could be. But then again, I think the reason why Jaku won that survey contest, I think, is because his kind of happiness is like one brought out of so much like harrowing, just abysmal suffering at the hands of like other people, mankind, just like men turn into animals basically, like just like kicking him, treating him like just for the sake of, glee, sadistically, like no other reason. Whole divisions. I think that Hitler kind of wasn't so much, involved in the kind of everyday kind of actions. Like he wasn't up close personal, but he was like kind of like behind the wheel. He was. But I think what he did was he set it up as if he set these, the Gestapo, the SS officers, like all these people, to be made up of, some of them, like whole brigades of like war criminals or people that, like with the Dura Wanger brigade, it was like a lot of rapists and like sexual offenders or violent criminals just thrown together in this haphazard thing, and then they were just like, fight this war for us, you crazy bastards. Like that's the kind of ideal that I've seen a lot. It's just like leasing the war from the kind of the intelligentsia, where maybe Hitler was kind of more mild-mannered, but kind of still the strategy, like, and other people called him a horrible strategist, which he probably was too, in the way that he kind of got really gutty and, dodge, what's the word, foolish at the end of the war, from just merely a war perspective. But obviously it benefited people to finally, for that for, Buchenwald, when that last march that, Jaku talks about, having to straggle through, so much, just like that was like, he was at his last, and he was still working, even at the end of his, near the end, like they were kind of, the Germans were looking for any last iota of like desperation or like finite, some kind of morsel of like of a means to keep this war machine kind of tumbling and going and effectively just kind of fighting a war. But like they couldn't do it anymore. They just they ended up surrendering, and then finally Jaku was freed, and he ended up and he described being in kind of on near German lines, I think, near Belgium, I think. But like he was talked about having to like cover himself up with 2 like tires, I think, and he was underneath this wooden kind of remains of maybe a vehicle of some kind, and he was even like that last night when like the Allied forces were kind of breaking through and then finally breached through the German lines, and he had was covered in bullets too, like, or not him, but he was talked about how close he was to getting shot with all these different bullets like lodged in this little piece of wood, and that between life and death, it's so just like a simple little line of people, like a line of people here, a line of people there. It's like, this is the death line, and then it's like at the last second I hear this archetypally, because it's like Frankel, I think, did this, or survived, and he said that there's like basically a 3 and I think it was like a 70% chance that he 70% chance that he wasn't going to survive. And I think those odds were probably similar with Jaku, I think, though I'm not sure exactly what the odds were, but they were very just like brutal, just like dang, like when it comes down to statistics, like on Holocaust survivors are rare, like really, and that's it's so much more than just Schindler's List or I don't know, some movies kind of dwell in kind of the mire of it a little bit, but I think some of that's in good faith, just because of how awful it was in real life to try to maintain your dignity in the middle of this. It's just so I'm just trying to imagine like what it's like to day by day kind of survive like this. It's good to think about these things, I think, at least for me, without going crazy. But just in so far that it actually, I think, fuels the kind of love for life that I think people should have, and it should be rooted in just like expediency or what feels good, because those are very, very, or just maintain, or just discipline, which works for some people. But like I said, discipline, it can lead to, you can have very disciplined psychopaths. You can have very happy sociopaths who are, do what feels good. But like, I think the thing at the end of the day is maintaining humanity in some way that's like universal, I think, and in a way that transcends, just ideology, or just, this or that side, and looking out for one another, I think, too, is like, we're all responsible for the lives of one another. Like, you never know what could happen, if there could be some all-out war tomorrow, or so yeah. Eddie Jaku, The Happiest Man on Earth, is a definite recommend. Quick, easy, accessible read. Just a bit of trigger warnings if you're like easily kind of disturbed by certain things, which is understandable. But yeah, thanks for watching.